You are listening to the Buried Treasures podcast. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe down below. Like, comment, and share your favorite episode with your friends and family members. And please help us establish and build a masjid in Lombard, Illinois. You can go to supportmu.org to make a contribution. Jazakumullahu khairan. Welcome to the Buried Treasures podcast, brought to you by Masjid Uthman, where I interview a new guest every week to discover their journey. I'm Hamzah wald. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone, for joining us today, mashallah. We have a very special guest, the one, the only, Shaykh Hamzah Maqbul. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, mashallah. Well, yourself?
Alhamdulillah, mashallah, everything's well.
Oh.
How have you been?
I've been so far so good. Alhamdulillah, mashallah.
Nice, mashallah. You're here in Chicago now?
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Mashallah, mashallah. So, Mona, tell us a little bit about your early life. Where were you born and raised, and what were you up to?
I was born in a city called Whittier in Southern California. We lived in Linwood. If you Google Maps Linwood, it's right next to a slightly more well-known but very similar in composition city called Compton, mashallah. And so I lived there until I was maybe like 5 or so.
Okay.
And then we moved to another more well-off suburb in Southern California called Cerritos on the southern side of LA County, where I went to preschool, from preschool to the 4th grade.
Okay, mashallah.
And then my family moved to Blaine, which is on the border of Canada. And so I went to middle school, 5th grade through 8th grade, and then high school in Blaine. And that's basically where my childhood was. We had a relatively large and vibrant Muslim community, or at least relatively large and vibrant Muslim community in Los Angeles. We used to drive all the way to the Islamic Center of Orange County, which is in Garden Grove. It's quite a trek, but still, half an hour away was better than Blaine, where the nearest masjid either required you to cross an international border or go into Seattle, which is about 100 miles away. So moving to Blaine was kind of like a drastic cut from any sort of Muslim community. And it caused us to kind of romanticize a little bit our days in Los Angeles. We later on realized that there wasn't really much deen going on there either, but at any rate, yeah.
Nice, mashallah. And you did your high school and college in Washington?
Yeah.
Okay,
I went to the University of Washington. I did my associate's degree during high school. So I graduated from high school on a Monday and from community college on that same Friday. And then started summer school at the University of Washington the following Monday. And I did my undergrad from 1999 through 2004 at the University of Washington in Seattle.
Okay, mashallah. So you got a degree in biochemistry. Is that what you always wanted to do?
I got a degree in biochemistry. I have another degree in Near Eastern languages, both doing the track for Arabic and the track for the Turkic languages of Central Asia. I don't know. I didn't look at college as vocational training. I looked at it as knowledge that a person should know and should want to know. So yeah, it is something I wanted to do always, in the sense that I found it very interesting. But I didn't necessarily take it up as a career path. Generally, kids who go to biochem, they do it in order to go to medical school. However, you don't really need to do a biochem degree to go to medical school. And actually, I was cognizant at the time that if I wanted to get into medical school, it probably would have been better to do an easier degree so you get a higher GPA. But I wanted to do biochemistry because it was just really interesting. Okay, it seemed like the nexus of all that's useful in the material sciences in its like most refined and applied form. How does physics, math, chemistry, all of these things, how do they kind of come together in order to explain the way life works? So I wanted to do that, and that's why I did it.
Okay, mashallah. And you went to school like right around 9/11 as well. How was the environment on campus after 9/11?
Yeah, it was an interesting time. I had 2 years. We got in 2 years in university before 9/11. And then when 9/11 hit, I think as time has passed, when we look back, it seems like the time 9/11 hit, particularly, actually, there wasn't all that much hostility toward the Muslim community. In fact, there were some people who were starting to try to use it in order to stir up hostility, but in general, the environment, at least where I was in the West Coast, and what I could tell from the media, it seemed to indicate that most people understood that these were some foreigners and there are particular people that are not representative of Islam or Muslims. And in that vein, there was a lot of demand for people to know more about Islam. And so because I was doing the Near Eastern languages track at the University of Washington, and because I was kind of a very active student in terms of, like, Arabic class wasn't to me just a class to pass and get grades, but I was really involved with it. Because of that, the department, there was some demand on them to have people who can, like, speak about Islam or speak about topics related to the Middle East. So they said, hey, are you interested in helping us out with this because there's so much demand? I said, sure. So they actually listed my name as an expert on Islam while I was a student, which is interesting because that's kind of what pushed me to actually take up studies full time, was the realization that there's an entire industry of quote unquote experts on Islam that were just as bogus level experts as I was, if not even more so. And there were actually some people who knew quite a bit about Islam that were not Muslims, and not all of them, or that were Muslims for that matter, but not all of them had the best interest of Islam in mind, or the best interest of Muslims in mind, or the most sincere commitment to the truth in mind. And it wasn't stopping them from going out there and doing a lot. And, like I was alluding to from before, I think a lot of the, anti-Islam sentiment, I dislike this expression, Islamophobia, although I think it is true for some people. But, a lot of the Islamophobia was whipped up afterward. It was because there was interest in knowing more about Islam, and there were not Muslims that were there to fill in that gap for interest. And so it's filled with, all of these jackals and hyenas that are just trying to push their own agenda, whether it be some sort of like heterodox sectarian agenda from within people who are culturally Muslim, or some sort of political agenda between Muslim political groups, or some sort of political agenda between non-Muslim groups that are just, people trying to make a buck and push certain political policies or social policies for their own material enrichment. And they didn't care if it meant, like, trampling over the bodies of hundreds of thousands of Afghanis or Iraqis or whatever it is.
So that's pretty interesting. And did you ever take your MCAT?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, mashallah.
I did. I actually did quite well at it.
Mashallah.
I did quite well at it. The biological sciences section of the MCAT, I scored the highest percentile possible. But by that time, I wasn't interested in becoming a doctor. I mean, like, I still think, like, it's an honorable profession. I question whether every single person who takes it up as a profession takes it up in the most honorable way, but there are people who do. MashaAllah, our mutual friend, Dr. Faiz Hussein, MashaAllah, he went on this medical mission to Yemen, and he went on these medical missions to these other places as well. And he's like, Sheikh, is it going to be safe? I go, of course it's not safe. That's why you're going to go to Jannah, bro. Like, I go, if it was safe, everyone would be doing it. But they still do it anyway.
Yeah,
so
mashallah.
I admired them, for as much crap as I talk about doctors. But, like, I admire those people who actually do that. It's a little segue. It's a podcast, right? You don't have to stop for a commercial break. But there are people like that. And then on the flip side, there are people like who are asking me, hey, Sheikh, can I get a fatwa from you for a medical exemption to shave my beard, that I can't shave my beard and wear the N95 mask so that I don't have to work during Corona. I was like, no, dude, you're a coward. I go, this is what you guys are supposed to do. This is your jihad, your mujahid fi sabilillah. If you die treating the patients, you're going to go to Jannah as a shaheed. I go, this is not. I go, you can go ask somebody else for this fatwa. I'm not going to give it to you. I go, and I urge you also to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All this investment was put into you. People, the qawm needs you right now. If you're going to drop them at the last minute, that's not cool. And, who knows, maybe someone is listening, say, hey, you jerk, what a horrible thing for you to say. I'm saying just think about it. Maybe sometimes what happens is nobody prepares for things like that. Nobody puts on the schedule, next year I think we'll have like a mass destruction worldwide pandemic. So it hits you and you don't know how to react properly. But now that you had some time to think about it, like that would have been a very unique and beautiful time to to earn some thawab. That you couldn't have done so by being a scholar, or you couldn't have done so by being mujahid, or you couldn't have done so by all these other means. And Allah Ta'ala gives everybody an opportunity that suits them. And so, think about it, and, maybe who knows, Allah Ta'ala will give you other opportunities in the future. But yeah, I wanted to be a doctor, but for whatever reason, by the time after I had taken the MCAT, the gap between taking the MCAT and between actually getting around to applying to med school, by that time I had lost all interest in pursuing medicine as a career, and was turned toward my higher studies in Islam.
So what changed that trajectory from medicine to Islamic studies?
Like I said, just this realization that our community is right now like a ship without a captain. And there are a lot of people that are very quick to talk garbage about the scholars, because sadly, there are many people who pretend to have religious knowledge and they abuse Islam. And even sadder than that, there are many people who actually do have religious knowledge and they still buck Islam in order to satisfy their material or financial or egotistical desires. And unfortunately, if we don't have some sort of true leadership, especially at times like that, then it's going to be really problematic for our community. It's going to mean our community has no future. So I figured that, hey, this is something that, mashallah, all the uncles are ready to talk crap about the Molvis and how they've ruined everything. This is an opportunity that we can either, put up or shut up. And so I thought, this is what this time needs. It doesn't need another doctor. There are many of my friends who, mashallah, went on to become wonderful physicians, and they're fulfilling that need. But this was something unique that I didn't feel like there are many other people who were in the position to fulfill. And amongst those who were, almost none of them were taking the opportunity. So I figured I'll step forward and take it if no one else wants it.
MashaAllah. So when did that initial spark begin? So you were taking Arabic classes in college as well. When did you go to Mauritania?
So the initial spark began. I have to preface this by saying that as far as that question, I think it's there in every person. I wanted to learn about Deen since I was a child. And generally, this idea of like, oh, Abu, can I be an imam when I grew up? Is, yeah, but where are you going to eat from? How are you going to put food on the table or whatever? Those general kind of very normal comments, they started very early. And so, as a child, a person listens to their parents. And, I thought, okay, this is not a viable career option, but we can still learn about it. It's still something that we can learn about it as long as we have something to eat and drink. The idea of taking up studies full time was, again, in that, during that undergrad phase. And I told my father I wanted to study, and he says, well, why don't you study Deen and become a doctor? And so I said, okay, I can do both. That's fine. And then I said, but I want to study Deen first. I said, because when I die, if I die in the middle, the ilm of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the ilm of the Quran, it will help me in my grave. Whereas, I don't know, like knowing what type of antibiotic to prescribe a person it's not going to help. So, he said, then at least finish your undergrad first before going anywhere full time. And so I'd agreed to that, but even that it was difficult for me to wait that long. And so I had this idea, which was that I would do a study abroad program for a year and do it in a Muslim country. And that way I could keep working on my Arabic and like take classes on the side with some local ulama in different places, which is a very naive idea, especially if you want to go to the Arab world. Unfortunately, there's so many issues. There's no like country in the Arab world that's free. I know there's all sorts of there are different alliances that are against each other. All of them are the same. They're all super repressive governments. If our Arab listeners are listening to me, don't get all nationalistic and be like, oh, you stupid Pakistani. Of course, you would say the same thing. You would say that it's not like that. Literally, other than Mauritania, I have not seen, and I haven't been to Mauritania for more than 15, 20 years now. It was 2004, so it's 15 years it's been. It's been a long time. And unfortunately, it's kind of like this. But I had this idea that maybe you can just show up to some of the ulama's house, they'll teach you, which is probably not going to happen. And I mean, it can happen, but it's a lot more difficult than a person would think it should be. And it's a lot more difficult than it was classically. So I had this idea. So I went to the study abroad office and looked at different universities. There's one Jamiat al-Akhawain in Morocco, and there's there's just different universities, Egypt, Jordan, places like that have these kind of exchange programs that you do study abroad for a year. And then when in the study abroad office, I had this idea. I asked the gentleman who was in the study abroad office, I think his name was David Fenner, very nice guy, mashallah. I said, hey, would you guys have any problem if I did a study abroad that was an independent study, meaning I could be gone out of the country, but still, because the whole point of study abroad is that you still get credit for your work in the university and you still get the disbursement of financial aid from the government.
Yeah.
And so I said, would it be possible to do study abroad and independent study at the same time, where I could do study abroad through your office and get all of that dispensation? And on top of it, I wouldn't have to actually sign up for, to go to school in another country, in another institution. He's like, yeah. He goes, I wouldn't mind signing off on it, but you should probably write what proposal that you have, so that we're not just, so that it's not like there's no accounting for it.
Yeah.
So I said, I said, I know what I want to do. I want to go to Mauritania. And so he's like, okay, cool, write the proposal and we'll talk about it. So I had to get the proposal passed by the Near Eastern Languages Department and from the Study Abroad Office. The Near Eastern Languages Department signed off on it. David Fenner, actually, when he heard about Mauritania, he was really excited, because apparently he lived in Oman for some time and he used to like to hang out with the Bedouins. So he was telling me about camel spiders and all sorts of other weird stuff that happens out in the desert, some of which was really creepy. And then I actually got to see it up front in real life. The camel spider is, I don't even know if it's really a spider or not. I don't know what the taxonomy of it is, but it's something that's like about as big as your hand, and it can jump like 4 feet up into the air, and it just looks like something from Aliens, and it's just horrible. It looks horrible, and like if you light a fire in the middle of the night, they're attracted to the fire, so you can be sitting around the fire, they'll run and jump over your head into the fire, and it's just really creepy. But yeah, like all that stuff, we got to go see. But at any rate, he was really excited about the project. The department people were relatively nice people, and they signed off on the project as well. They said, just bring us recordings of your durus, so that we have some so that we have some proof that you actually did something, And so I dutifully produced hundreds of hours of recordings of Maliki fiqh and other stuff. Arabic grammar and whatnot, and some of which I'll listen to, not to hear the dars, because it's very painful to hear your own voice, especially at that stage of life. But I'll listen just to hear the background noises in the desert, the different types of birds and things like that. It's really nice, mashallah. But yeah, I made those recordings. And
so, mashallah, why did you choose like Mauritania over, say, Morocco or another country?
I mean, the thing is, if you want to, the reasoning I had at the time was, if you want to get the proposal accepted, it should be an interesting proposal. That's one part of it. Another part of it was actually the imam of our masjid, the closest masjid to our house, was in Richmond, in British Columbia, in Canada. And before 9/11, it was very easy to cross the border. So the imam of the masjid, although that was shortly after 9/11, but the imam of the masjid, my father asked him, what do you think about this, this thing that he wants to do? He says, yeah, make him go to Mauritania, because if he's not really into it, he'll burn out quickly and get back to his track in life. He's not going to hang out and be comfortable. And if he hacks it over there, then maybe this is a good line for him.
Yeah,
which is there's a lot of hikmah in it. There's a lot of wisdom in it, because I've seen some of the most dangerous people for the iman of themselves and for others are those people who are half baked. La ilaha illa wa la ilaha illa. They're kind of like half in the world of studying deen, in the world of fiqh, the world of hadith, the world of tasawwuf, but they're not willing to put enough forward to actually achieve anything in it. But then on the flip side, they're not willing to put enough forward in any other sort of like walk of life to actually be good at what they're doing. And so they just live in this space where they're not really a full human being in anything, and it turns into resentment afterward. And when a person like that fills with resentment, they start speaking negatively, and they know more about the deen than the average person does. So the average person can't shut them down. So the average person will usually, if they're a healthy person, they'll have this idea of like, well, this person knows more than me, so I shouldn't say anything. But they poison themselves and they poison others, and they fill people with doubts. I see like there are Masājid all over the place. People like, oh, well, Shaykh, I heard that Jummah is not valid. I heard this is not valid. I heard that's not valid. No one's nikah is valid. Everybody is going to Jahannam. Everybody's this, everybody's that. A lot of our Tablighi brothers actually end up with this mindset as well, because they have enough deen to know something is wrong, but they don't have enough an ilm in order to put the pieces together again and figure out what is right. And so they kind of go down these kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy of destruction modes of thinking. It's not a good thing. So mashallah, Imam Ziad Delich, I think he's in Ottawa now. He told my father, he's like, yeah, make him go to Mauritania. And that's kind of how that came together.
Nice, mashallah.
Yeah.
So how was it going or taking that flight over to Mauritania and then getting there? And where were you studying?
Yeah, so you can't just take a flight to Mauritania from America, as far as I can tell. I think the direct flights to Mauritania, at least so many years ago when I went, were, I think there was one British Airways from London. There was like once a week. There was one from Paris. There was one from Morocco, and then a couple of them from a number of countries in East Africa, North Africa. But it's a very small airport, and it's like a bus station. So, and if you try, I think to this day it's like that. If you try to actually get a ticket from like O'Hare to Nouakchott, it's going to be like wildly expensive. I figured that out at the time as well. So I booked a ticket from Seattle to Dar al-Bayda, Casablanca in Mauritania, in Morocco. And then from there, I bought a local ticket to Mauritania. And I spent like about a week or 10 days in Morocco, and then purchased my onward ticket to Mauritania. And it's, going to Morocco is interesting enough, because it's definitely not America. And, their Arabic there is very different. It's very difficult to understand for a person who's only understood or read Fusha. And in some ways, actually, it's interesting that the Moroccans have this idea that their own language is very different than classical Arabic. And because of that, they'll switch. If somebody is educated enough, they'll switch for you. Whereas the Egyptians and Syrians don't understand that their language is like super, like just as different from classical Arabic, and so it's difficult for them to do so. I don't know what that is, why that is, but again, Morocco it's a culturally vibrant place. They have a lot of arts. They have cuisine. They just have like a very solid culture. Going from there into Mauritania, which is completely just a desert. The airport is essentially a bus station. There are no jet bridges at the airport. There are livestock in the streets. I don't know. Maybe Mauritania has changed since then, but I assume that it couldn't have changed all that much, at least in those ways. And it's super hot. And that first night, the brother who said he would pick me up from the airport, I waited for him for 3 hours and nobody came. So I had to go and get a taxi that took me to a crappy hotel that just super overcharged me. And I couldn't sleep there. The sheets smelled it was just a horrible experience. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do like for a whole year over here. But then when I woke up in the morning, I found conveyance to another city, Kifa, which is further east in the country. And after, I guess, lounging around over there for almost 2 weeks on promises that we'll take you. Finally, I kind of lost it and said, okay, like what's going on? How come we're not going to the Mahdara? And then they said, okay, inshallah, we'll get you like within 3 days on the the next vehicle that's going out there. And I got there. And interestingly enough, even though the Mahdara, the Madrasa of Murabat al-Hajj, rahimahullah tabarak wa ta'ala, it's probably the most remote place, one of the more remote places you're going to go to in Mauritania. It was actually surprisingly and refreshingly, it was actually a lot nicer than any of the other places I went to.
Oh, wow.
Because it's up on a mountain at a height, so at nighttime the wind is not hot, it cools down a little bit, and because it's so far away from any civilization, there's a type of freshness of nature and cleanliness over there that I guess I needed that after being stranded in like Nouakchott and Kifa and all. The cities in Mauritania are really not. They're really not cities, and I guess I understand why people live there, because they have to do business and they have to like earn a living and things like that. But the Badia, I think even the Mauritanians appreciate that the open desert is. There's a type of healthiness to it. There's a type of natural good feeling in it that all of them long for. And so that was really nice. It was a really good experience to be out there. There's no electricity. There's no running water. Those things are really difficult. They take a lot to get used to. There are a lot of flies. It's extremely hot during the day. But a number of things happen when that happens. One is that, you're forced to go to sleep. You feel actually naturally sleepy right after Isha, and then you wake up. If you go to sleep right after Isha, you wake up at Fajr time without an alarm clock. And you're just kind of at one with nature. And the fact that there's nothing to eat means you spend less time going to the bathroom. The fact that there's nothing to buy means you spend less time wasting, you waste less time doing this, that, or the other thing. The fact that there's no cell phone, reception there means you spend less time wasting time talking to people. And the fact that it's so hot and otherwise difficult to hack, it means that the one escape you have is the books. And so I found myself reading in Mauritania in 1 week more than I would read in a month anywhere else, because there's really nothing else to do. Which is the way it should be, which is the way the life of a student of knowledge should be. And that taught me this idea that, look, sometimes you have, in order to look up a word, it's going to take 2-3 hours. The common sense of a normal person is like, if I do that, then like I'm never going to learn anything in my life. So I'm just going to like leave it alone and let outsource it to somebody else. But being out there, kind of, you saw even the elders, mashallah, they had so much love for ilm that they would do that. They would crack books open and just sit and read. And really have, that is your job. That's what's important. That's the reason you're there. That is the responsible thing to do with your time. And I learned that from them, and I haven't been like the best practitioner of it. You might find me on Facebook or Twitter, or myself engaging in stupid, like kind of bickering with people or nonsense. But it is something that I aspire to, and it is a reason that I do put my phone away from time to time, just so that I can engage with that again.
MashaAllah. So did you know anybody that was studying at the madrasa?
Not at the time. I knew of some people who had gone, and I got some advice from them, but I didn't know anyone who was studying at the madrasa at the time. Okay. No.
So can you describe like the living quarters for the students?
Yeah, it's a Mahdara. If someone has some familiarity with the Arabic language, the word hadari is kind of like an antonym for Badui. Bedouin is like a nomad. So hadari is a person who's a sedentary person who lives in the same place, doesn't move from place to place. So Mahdara is essentially the madrasa of the Bedouins, that they would have a Bedouin encampment, but one that's permanently in one place. It doesn't really move around so much. And so everybody lived in tents. A couple of the mashayikh had like a dar. They would just have like a kind of like a raw brick or adobe structure that they would mostly store things in. Mostly the books would be in there, or flour, rice, foodstuffs, other effects would be stored there. But it's too hot to actually live inside. So even the mashayikh would live in the tents, and the students would live in tents as well. And students would get together. The Mauritanian students would get together and make their own tents. The Westerners, I don't know of anyone who knew how to make their own tent, but they would, I guess, pay locals to make tents for them as well, and they would help out in the work as well. And that's what it is. Your living quarters is what you want to make of it. And generally, the Mauritanians seem to stay with each other, like with their own tribesmen. So if somebody has a relative or a tribesman who is already studying over there, they would kind of stay with them until they kind of learn the ropes and were able to do stuff on their own. But it was a very informal setup. There's no registration. There's no year one, year two. There's no, the mashayikh, by and large, they may take pity on you and help you out. But by and large, the idea was that, their service is that they're there to teach. All the rest of it is kind of up to you, and it's a big desert. You can live wherever you want.
MashaAllah. How were there was scorpions, you said there was
all sorts of stuff, yeah. Scorpions and snakes and camel spiders and mosquitoes and flies.
Did you ever get bit or anything?
Mosquitoes, a lot.
Yeah.
Scorpions, alhamdulillah, no.
MashaAllah.
But you do got to, keep an eye out for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ before putting your shoes on to shake them out and see if there's anything inside of them.
Yeah.
To look for things like that, not just mindlessly, go through things. So yeah, there were people in the Mahdara that did have to deal with those things. Murabit al-Hajj, he made dua when he made Hajj. He was al-Hajj not just because he booked a ticket on Delta Airlines, but because he made Hajj on foot. When he was very young, and he had an extraordinarily long life.
MashaAllah.
He was at least 114, 113 years old when he passed away. And so he made Hajj on foot, and he heard of the fall of the caliphate, from Makkah Mukarramah when he was on Hajj. So that gives you an idea of how old he was. So from the du'as that he made in Hajj were that none of his students die of snake bite. And he was given bishara in a dream by the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam that particular dua would be accepted. And to my knowledge, nobody ever died of snake bite in his Mahdara. But it doesn't mean that there aren't snakes around.
Yeah,
the snakes actually have yearly migrations where there'll be just a gang of them. They'll just go straight through, and you just gotta avoid them.
Yeah.
And snakes are, they're as afraid of humans, if not more afraid of humans than humans are of them. But you don't want to corner one. You give it no option except for to hit you, or you stumble across it. It doesn't know you're there. You don't know it's there. If you stumble across it, trip over it or something, it'll probably bite you. Mm-hmm. So you got to be careful about all that stuff.
Okay, mashallah. And then is this the same time you're having a lot of exposure into Maliki fiqh as well?
Yeah. So that was one of the books that I read over there was the Risalat ibn Abi Zayd in Maliki fiqh. And, I wanted to read from them those things that they were well known for.
Mm-hmm.
So Maliki fiqh was the thing that I thought, okay, this is probably the best place to study it. I'm not going to get another opportunity like this anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, mashallah. And then can you share with us some of the teachers and, what you kind of got back or got from Mauritania? And was there ever a time was it ever too much for you in Mauritania?
So the main teachers in the Mahdara were, Murabit was there, and he was very aged, and you could tabarrukan read a dars to him. He would listen to it. He'd correct your mistakes. But he was already so aged that it was very difficult for him even to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would mostly just go to him for du'as. Every now and again, we would read a dars to him for tabarruk. And but his mind was still sharp. If you made a mistake, he would still correct you. But it seemed like a lot of effort. We didn't want to bother him.
Mm-hmm.
And then with him was his cousin Murabit Haddamin, who's still alive, and he is still teaching. And he was the main one that we would go and take dars from. And then afterward, one of Murabit's grandsons, his name is Sheikh Abdullah. He's the son of Murabit Ahmed Fal, who passed away relatively recently. Ahmed Fal married one of Murabit al-Hajj's daughters. And so he had a separate Mahdara called Ain al-Khashba in a different place. The Mahdara of Murabit al-Hajj was a place called Tuwaymarat. And Ain al-Khashba was where Murabit Ahmed Fal would teach. But Ahmed Fal's son would spend a great deal of time with his grandfather Murabit al-Hajj, and so he would teach there as well. So the tartib was that we would first go to Murabat Haddamin, and then we would go to Sheikh Abdullah and read the lesson to him a second time.
MashaAllah.
And in general, it was different. It's like kind of the opposite of the way Darsh Nizami is, that you only read one lesson a day, and you're expected to memorize it. As a kind of a lackey Westerner, I was unfortunately not super on top of that. I tried a little bit. It was difficult. The thing is, you're dealing with so many things at that time. You're in a very different environment. Like you're saying, was it hard? Was it too much? Yeah, like every hour of the day was too much. It was really, really hot. You're really hungry. You're really thirsty. You don't, the idea of like having to go to a well to get water to drink is harsh enough. Having to go to a well and get water to wash your clothes and to do all these other things. It was very straining, taxing on the body, which was very weak and unaccustomed to hardship. And so, the Mashayikh, they took pity on us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them.
Ameen.
They took pity on us. And, so many times Murabat Haddamin would send one of his sons into the tents to look for me so as to invite me to go eat something with them, because they were not, they knew that, it's not going to be every day. I didn't used to eat every day. A person look at me now may not be able to tell, but yeah, it was kind of rough. So yeah, it became overwhelming very frequently. But that was part of the joy. I think at some point I was like so overwhelmed. I even I was just so like just frazzled. Even parts of the Quran I'd memorized, I just couldn't read them anymore. It wasn't necessary. I just get it was just because of how overwhelming it was. It was too much. But it was good in the sense that it made us kind of really made me hyper focus on what I was doing. And it made me also value that, hey, this is like difficult, because this seems to be what's described in the books as the very standard way people used to go and seek knowledge. That used to be the same way that they used to do in the Indian subcontinent before the British colonized the Indian subcontinent. This seems to be the system that was there as well. And so then the Darsh Nizami syllabus and methodology was developed like later on and became kind of proliferated through the subcontinent later on because of a necessity to produce people quicker than the old way. But the old way produced far more solid people. Far more solid people.
Did you guys have like any breaks or anything where you guys like, what would you guys do for like leisure?
Absolutely, there were breaks.
Okay.
Yeah, no, there were no darses on Friday.
Okay, mashallah.
Although I would show up and take dars anyway, but there's no dars on Friday, and they had a tartib, like every certain amount of weeks you just take a week off or something like that.
Okay,
the Mauritanians themselves, because the idea was that if you just keep cramming stuff in, you're gonna burn out. You're not gonna stick with the program.
Yeah.
So they had that idea that this is also part of what a person should do. So sometimes people would take because there were cars that would come and go. They'd bring travelers to and from the main road, and that would sometimes be a stop on the way. On the way to other places remote places that people needed to reach in the desert. And so, someone, if they had like some time off or whatever, they would go to the city, maybe use the internet. They had really slow internet, but they had internet in Nouakchott, in the capital. There was also a place called Cafe Iraqi, which was run by Iraqi. I don't even know why he would be in Nouakchott. I'm sure there's some long and colorful story, but not any of my business. So we just Cafe Iraqi, you get a burger made out of ground camel.
Nice.
And it was very tasty, especially after being in the Badia for so long. And so people would do stuff, or they would go and visit some of the other mashayikh. There are other mashayikh out in the Badia, in the desert as well, in that area, Sheikh Muhammad Zain or Murabit Ahmed Fal and Ain Khashba or whatever. And then they would come back and keep studying.
Nice, mashallah. And like you're going at a time, mashallah, that cell phone is not as common.
You're right.
It's completely like there's no smartphones. That's obsolete. It hasn't even been invented. How are you communicating back home, and was there like a feeling of like homesickness?
Yeah, mostly it was emails. There is a feeling of homesickness in the sense that I guess takes a little bit longer, but I was homesick in the sense that the body's just not unaccustomed to like that level of deprivation.
Yeah.
And so like I'd have weird dreams. Like I'd have a dream like of something very weird or simple. Like I'd have a dream about eating a hamburger, and then you wake up and you're in the middle of the desert swatting a fly. You know, you're like 400 miles away from like the nearest hamburger or something like that. So that's just enough being like, hey, what's going on here? But otherwise, I was happy that I was there. I was enjoying the durus. I was enjoying reading the books. You know, the physical discomfort goes away when you allow yourself to be enveloped in the rapture of the books. And, you know, those moments were very precious. They were very good moments. And they were good moments. The person didn't have any other responsibility. You're nothing. As a student of knowledge, you're like nothing to the world, you know? And that's really wonderful, because then it's just, you know, it's just you and Allah Ta'ala. You have a lot of time between you and Allah Ta'ala. You're not worrying about anything else. You're not, you know, how much gunnah are you going to do out in the desert? There's like nothing haram for miles around, like, you know, that a person could be attracted by. And so it was a good time.
Nice, mashallah. And then you spent about a year there, right?
I wouldn't say even a year. I would say closer to about 4 months. What happened about 4 months into being there? About 4 months into being there, there was an attempted coup, which I was told later on was relatively not so uncommon of an occurrence. But because of that, the entire country was a little bit more on edge, and so I decided at that time, because of that, there's two things that happened. One was there was an attempted coup. The other thing was I tried to go to the embassy. In my naivety, I tried to go to the American embassy and register that I was there, which is apparently like a normal thing to do when a person goes to another country.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening on the flip side is they had some cowboys over there that were like some George W. Bush war on terror guys, you know, that they weren't the A grade. They weren't able to make the cut and go to like a better embassy like Abu Dhabi or Qatar or whatever. And so these guys just basically are like, you know, they told us point blank, you know, we find you suspicious and don't want you to come here anymore. And like, otherwise, you know, we should have you arrested and questioned and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, for what? I'm just trying to...
I'm just in the desert, man.
I'm just here to let you guys know that I'm here. I'm like, if you don't want me to come, like, I don't have any business here other than that. But like, I thought that was a normal thing. And they basically did this thing that was basically threatened us and whatever. And I was like, okay, that's, you know, so that was already one tension on top of the head. Nobody wants to end up in Guantanamo for no reason or whatever. And it was a time of mass hysteria. I mean, even this country, people are comfortable now. You know, I see the way they mouth off on the internet and the way that, you know, they speak in public. And I'm like, fine, look, if you need to say the haqq, but don't be stupid about it. Why? Because people are listening, and people, again, like we talked about in the beginning, not everybody has your best intentions, your best, you know, your best wishes in mind when they listen to when they hear what you're saying. And so, you know, that was a reality whenever, you know, right, especially very close to 9/11, a couple, 2-3 years after 9/11, when we would cross the border, they would treat us like we're terrorists. When we would have any interaction with any government agency, they would treat us with suspicion. It was kind of accepted that we were going to be treated with suspicion. And that's the default state in most Arab countries, Muslim countries in the world, especially Arab countries. That's the default state if you're practicing Muslim anyway, is that you're, you know, like, of course you're going to be under suspicion of being a terrorist, whatever that means. And so, you know, when that was already there, and then on top of that, the whole issue of the coup happened. I felt a little bit on edge. So our Shaykh Murabit Haddamin had a son who was overseas teaching in the Gulf, and so we just went to him to go and study. And he, you know, he took me in, and I finished my books with him, and then I actually made my way back to Mauritania later on, and then read some more over there and finished some more. But that was again maybe about a month at the tail end of my year abroad. And then in the middle, basically, I spent between the Gulf and between Pakistan, I went back and forth and finished the books that I had wanted to read for that year.
Okay, mashallah.
Yeah.
And then so you're in Mauritania for a few months, then you go to the Gulf, then you go back to Mauritania,
Yeah.
and then you head back to America after that?
Yeah. Then I went to from Mauritania back to Morocco, and then from Morocco back to.
Okay, mashallah. And then where did you go after that?
Then I went back. I tried to cram all my classes into the University of Washington that I needed to graduate into one term. I actually failed a class in that term, and I wasn't going to graduate. I'd have to come back for another year. So I was a little bit down, and so luckily the counselor for the chemistry department, who also kind of dealt with the students in biochem, she's like, "Oh, congratulations, you're going to graduate." I'm like, "Well, I'm kind of ashamed to admit that I don't think it's going to happen this time." And she's like, "Oh, why don't you make an appointment, come into the office, we'll talk about it." So she was like super into like meditation and Dalai Lama and all this other spiritual stuff, kind of, I guess, on the more Far Eastern trajectory. And so she was asking all these questions about Mauritania and about, Sufism and whatever. And so I was like, so I talked to her for some time. And while we were talking, she's like, "You know what? She goes, congratulations, you're going to graduate." I'm like, "I don't think I am." She's like, "No, I put an exemption in the system for your file. It's being put forward and you're going to get your degree."
Oh, mashallah.
I said, "That's even possible?" She goes, "How do you think any of these athletes graduate? How do you think the children of like big donors graduate?" She goes, "It happens all the time. Don't worry about it. Not every, like you're otherwise your entire academic record is stellar. And, there's reason to show that like, your poor performance this term was not because of, anything other than like just other stresses in your life. So like, it's fine." So she got me through. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give her hidayah. Allah ta'ala give her ihsan in this life. And in the next life, if Allah ta'ala gives from his fadl. Alhamdulillah, that's how I got through. And then after that, it was just a short matter of time that I wanted to go back. And I wanted to study. So I returned to the Gulf for another year, and I studied with Haddameen's son for another year. I reread some books. I read some books anew. And then in the meanwhile, I made plans to go to Pakistan and read hadith, read tafsir, and alhamdulillah, mashallah, that's how I kind of, I quit my job. I had a part-time job teaching English in the Gulf to kind of make my ends meet. And I'd quit the job and went to Pakistan. And lo and behold, like right away, right after, I thought like, I'm going to go to Pakistan and study. Right after that happened, the military dictator Pervez Musharraf had announced that he's putting a ban on all foreign students studying in Pakistani madrasas. And, alhamdulillah, Allah Ta'ala put a ban on him. And may Allah Ta'ala put a ban on every tyrant who thinks that they're going to somehow make their way ahead in this life at the expense of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But mashallah, I was put in a weird predicament because at that time, then all the major madars in Karachi, where I was where I went to first, because that's where my in-laws are, they weren't taking students with the exception of one, the Jamia Banuria in sight, not the old madrasa in Banuri town in Guru Mandir, but the Jamia Banuria in sight, Mufti Naeem, who just passed away relatively recently. His madrasa, mashallah, has an interesting reputation. But one thing I will say is that when I went there to see it, he was the only one. He said that you can study here if you want to. He said that if they, I go, aren't you afraid of the government's ban on foreign students? He said, Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him. He said, I have a safe in my office. I keep all of the passports of the foreign students in that safe until it's time for them to travel. And and I'm the only one who has the code to that safe. He says, and if anybody says, he says to me something about foreign students, I say, we have no foreign students. That's it. And I always admired that about him. And I always made dua about, for him, even though I elected not to study in his madrasa, I always made dua for him that Allah Ta'ala give him the reward of it as well, because it really sucks when you go to places where you really look up to people and institutions that you really look up to and you honor, and they say, no, you can't because the government said so. That really sucks. and it's a really bad feeling. And I understand why you can't just like throw everything in the garbage just for one person, and whatever. But I do have special place in my heart for him for that reason. And so what happened was, Maulana Abdul Halim Chishti rahimahullah ta'ala, who was the chair of the Takhasus in Hadith in Banuri town, he had told me, he said, stop trying to go to the Madaris in Karachi. It's not going to work. He says, go to the Madaris in Punjab, because in Karachi, the MQM government has a relatively antagonistic relationship with the ulama. Whereas in Pakistan, in Punjab, the Muslim League, who usually ends up ruling Punjab, they have a much more cordial relationship with the ulama over there. Like they try to settle things without a fight. Whereas in Karachi, it's not like that, unfortunately. And so he goes, you'll find madaris that will take you over there. So I was sent from Karachi to Lahore to the Khanqah of Sayyid Nafis Shah rahimahullah ta'ala, who was a Khalifa of Maulana Shah Abdul Qadir Raipuri rahimahullah ta'ala, who was the Shaykh of Maulana Abu Hassan Ali Nadwi. So he's this beer behind. The two of them were actually quite close while alive. Anyway, I was sent to his Khanqah. I spent the Ramadan in his Khanqah, and then I went back there for recommendations of where to study. So he says, you can go check out Jamia Madaniya. It's in the city. It'll be easy to come and go, to Lahore for you. If you don't like it, you can try the Jamia Babul Ulum in a remote place in Punjab called Karor Pakka in the southern part of Punjab. Mufti Abdul Majid, Abdul Majid, who was the principal over there. I'd met him when he came to the Khanqah in Ramadan as well. Initially, I actually preferred going to Karor Pakka because of the fact that it was remote and there'd be less distraction. It would be somewhat similar to Mauritania, but Shah Sahib said, go check this place out. It's right here. It's gonna be no skin off your back if you just check it out.
Yeah.
So I checked it out, and it was nice. It was not in the city of Lahore. It was a ways out. I mean, now I'm told that area is all developed, but at the time it was a ways out. It was maybe four miles down from Raiwan, maybe only 2 miles away from the Ijtima, the place where the Raiwan Ijtima takes place, the rice fields, and and I thought, okay, this is remote enough. It's fine, and the Asatiza seemed to be good. The first, I guess, month over there was very difficult for me, and then I went to the Khanqah and asked permission to go back to Mauritania, and I was denied the permission and said, "Don't worry, just keep studying; it'll be fine." And after that, though, once Sheikh sent me back, I felt better. I felt better, and then I continued with my studies.
Mashallah. So, what were the differences that you saw, like between Mauritania and like the Gulf, studying between the two countries?
The issue with the Gulf is I wasn't there in any sort of institutional setting.
It was like private learning.
It was just private learning.
Yeah.
The sheikh, he was the imam in a masjid that was kind of like far from the city, and it was just like going to the prayers and then having durus between the prayers. That's it.
Yeah.
It was not anything. It was something materially significantly more comfortable, but it was not all that different than Mauritania.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but there was nothing formal. There was nothing formal in that. It was just sit, sheikh, student, books, read, prepare, revise, look up other things. The sheikh had a significant library. He had a very small room at the time, and the room was just filled with books. Just like books everywhere. The bookshelf, books on the floor, books in piles, just books everywhere. And so whatever I needed to look up, he had like all sorts of books over there. So I got exposed. That was another benefit of living with him for that time, is that I got exposed to a number of different books, the titles of the books, the authors of the books, what to look up in what book. What are special things that are in what books.
Nice, mashallah. So then, you get into the madrasa in Pakistan. What year in the Dars and Nizami curriculum do you enter into?
So I was told that I can read some durus of the Jalalain and some durus of the Mishkat year at the same time. So I read in that 1 year the back 2 volumes of the Hidayah, in Hanafi fiqh, and I read the Tafsir al-Jalalain, and I read the Mishkat al-Masabih. I read the Nukhbat al-Fikr, and a couple of other short books. I read those together, and then afterward I went to I did the Dawra Hadith, and the Shaykh al-Hadith of the Madrasa said that if you can pass the exams, we'll give you the sanad.
Okay, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah, mashallah, I passed. I got the third position in the class.
Mashallah.
There were three degrees that were awarded with the level of imtiyaz, with the highest level, the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
I got the third one because I was very slow at reading Arabic. All the other guys were hafaz Quran. I learned how to read, Quran when I was like 18. So I read very slowly and stumble over my reading, and I still get like sneered at by the mashayikh for that to this day. Alhamdulillah, mashallah.
So going into Pakistan and entering that Dawra Hadith here, so prior to that, are you going, so between the Gulf, transferring over to Pakistan, are you coming back and forth to America during break time?
No, I only went from the first time I left my home to go to Mauritania the first time.
Yeah.
I only went back to America for that one term of school.
Just to graduate your college.
Yeah, that's it.
And then you were...
Then I was out. Yeah.
Wow, subhanAllah. And why did you switch from your studies in the Gulf to studies in Pakistan?
Because the thing is that hadith studies require something. They don't require something more institutional, but they're harder to pull off.
Yeah.
Without institutional learning. I guess you could sit and read all the Sihah Sitta from the same person, but generally it's just like so much information. It works out better to divvy up the durus amongst different mashayikh and things like that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to hear the books of hadith from the mashayikh, and the Mauritanians they concentrate more on fiqh and more on lugha, on the knowledge of the Arabic language, and more on the sciences of understanding, of diraya rather than riwaya, of transmission. And it doesn't mean that there are not Mauritanians with like profound, remarkable knowledge of hadith, but this idea of having a setup where students can come and go hear the hadith and like come and go and learn it, that's a more elaborate setup.
Yeah.
And they just didn't have it. They just didn't have the tradition of it.
Okay.
And so they had no asanid, they had no sanads of the hadith that in general were exchanged amongst them. They do have them, but they're not like a normal thing. They're a very special thing. And so I remember when I studied in Pakistan, I asked Chishti Sahib, I said, can I bring back ijazat for the mashayikh over there? And so he wrote them out. He said, tell me the names of the mashayikh. He wrote them out, and I gave them. I sent them back home. They sent them back to Mauritania. They're very appreciated, mashallah. But yeah, I guess that just wasn't something that they focused on as much as a cultural issue. Not to say that they don't have knowledge of it.
Yeah.
And so for that's mainly what I went to Pakistan for.
MashaAllah. And how was it entering that Dawra Hadith here? And just reciting hadith all day long and studying hadith all day long?
It's good. It's beautiful, mashallah. I would say that the in earnest the study of hadith is not in the Dawra. It doesn't start in the Dawra year. It starts in the Mishkat. The Mishkat, reading the Mishkat al-Masabih. But yeah, it really is. It opens your eyes to like a bigger world of the way fiqh works and the way the deen is, what the deen is. You understand a lot from the Quran. And you understand a lot from a lot of things, but the study of hadith brings it to life, because it's all those concepts, those deep and powerful concepts, but you saw how the Prophet ﷺ and the companions radiallahu anhum lived them, and how they lived the same, they lived those same realities but in their own different ways, and how it was a very human process, and how to put those things together, and how they may mean things that you don't really think they mean, right? At the very beginning, but like when you think about it, you understand it better. It really was. It was a way of understanding Islam in a more mature way. And it's really interesting. It's really fun, mashallah. We have, our brothers, our Wahhabi and Salafi brothers who bang on about, oh, follow the hadith, follow the hadith. One of the interesting gifts that studying the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ gave me is it actually made me realize that that's actually the weakest part of their da'wah, the weakest part of their intellectual claim is the fact they don't know anything about hadith, because every single thing that they put a hadith for as their proof, there's like 40 hadiths that are tangentially like saying something different. And they're unable to put them together, and oftentimes they're unaware. Like when a brother catches you in the masjid and says, well, like there's this hadith, they're unaware of the other hadiths in the topic. They were just fed one hadith from their sheikh that they're kind of blindly imitating, right? Which is what they accuse other people of doing, but they're actually the biggest blind imitators themselves. And then when you show them the other, oh, says it's da'if, it's weak. I said, no, it's not.
Yeah.
I said, no, it's not. No, Shaykh Albani said it is. Well, I go, what, is Shaykh Albani God or is he a prophet? Like, tell me, like, who is he to be the one that, like, I should just, like, submit? I'm telling you it's not weak. He says it's weak. I don't agree with him. My research suggests the other way around, and this is the research of greater mashayikh than him that corroborates what I'm saying. Now what? No, it's weak. I'm not talking to you. I'm not listening. And it's just, it's just a ridiculous mockery that the uneducated masses have made out of deen, and sadly because of the goading and prodding of some of their imams and some of their mashayikh. And it's just interesting. It's just so interesting how that's like the weakest link in their knowledge, is that they actually haven't read hadith. They don't know what's there in the books of hadith. If they had known, they would know that there are a lot of proofs for a lot of things that they had no idea about.
SubhanAllah. Is there anybody you knew in Pakistan while you were there?
What do you mean?
Like, were there any friends or family members that you'd kind of go back to or hang out with?
Yeah, no, I mean, we had some distant family members.
Okay.
There were some. There was my in-laws in Karachi, and then in Punjab there were some distant family members, family friends of my parents or whatever. Nobody I knew, really directly. There was some people who were like kind of like my cousins.
Yeah.
They were not like necessarily directly blood relatives, but they were the relatives of relatives. I would go crash their houses and stay there. I oftentimes remember those people and make dua for them.
Mashallah.
People in different places in the world, not only in Pakistan, not only in Karachi, Punjab, places like that, but even in the Gulf or in Egypt, or in you have to understand, sometimes for someone to take you in and to host you, or to even talk to you, they also it can be a hazard for them as well. They could end up in jail. They could, and I know I wasn't doing anything stupid. I was never involved in any of these groups. I wasn't trying to fight wars or anything. I was trying to just learn. But oftentimes the heavy-handedness of governments in places like that, they're not really all that concerned with facts. If you do something that they don't like, that's basically it. They'll throw you in jail and ask questions later, and it'll all settle out, after a couple of years. And so I make dua for those people, everyone who helped me along the way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them full measure of any good that we may have done after coming back. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them full measure of it. And not only just that, but whatever good we should have been doing, but we're too lazy to do. Our laziness is not their fault. But their hope was that we would not be lazy, and we wouldn't waste our time. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them the full measure of reward for that.
MashaAllah. I mean, how was your graduation? How was reciting the final hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari?
So I'm not super into all that.
Yeah.
I'm not super into the whole all these like big parties and mahafil that they have. I understand the kind of cultural and political usefulness of it, that it tells people that this is happening and it gets people to think about it that otherwise might not. But I always thought that there's a fair amount of pretense that's involved in those things, and that the only party is your amal. If you learn something and it changes your life for the better, then that's what your celebration is, by being a good person, rather than by throwing a party and showing everybody, look, I'm a Maulana now, or whatever. I remember even calling my Mauritanian ustad in the Gulf. After graduating, I said, they have this thing, and when you're done studying, they give you the sanad, and they put a turban on your head, and then the people call you Maulana. And he said that. He said, Zain, mashallah. He said, خذ العمامة, خذ السنة, خذ الإجازة والعمامة, وخلي مولانا في Pakistan. He says, this is really beautiful. He says, take the turban and take the sanad. And he says, you can leave Maulana in Pakistan. He says, you don't need any of that. And it's true.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. Our elders used to be like that. Even our elders in the Indian subcontinent. Maulana Hussain Ahmed Madani rahimahullah ta'ala. He didn't even used to write Madani with his name. He would write Faizabadi with his name out of humility and not wanting to use Medina to hype himself up.
Mm-hmm.
He would sign his letters with the title of the Nange Aslaf, the humiliation or the shame of the Aslaf. And nowadays you have people, literally it's ridiculous. You have someone, puts a poster up, Mufti Maulana, this and that, Sheikh Fulan, Ibn Fulan. They write their own name as Sheikh this and Mufti that and Maulana this and whatever at gmail.com. And, these are things that they're doing themselves, and they market themselves like that. And it's just kind of a joke. It's kind of stupid. I'm sorry. I know if someone might piss them off, if it's your sheikh who does it. I'm sorry. I just didn't see our mashayikh doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see Murabat al-Hajj doing it. I didn't see Haddamin doing it. I mean, literally in Mauritania, you're on a first name basis with your mashayikh. But, that being said, those people you're on a first name basis with, what title are you going to give to somebody who's memorized more books than you can carry? It's all bakwas anyway, you know them because of who they are. Because when it comes to ilm, they throw down so hard you can't really. There's really nothing else needed. There's no fronting or posturing needed. I didn't see any of that from our mashayikh that I studied with in Madaniya or our mashayikh in the Khanqa, nor did I see anything like that in the past. That people needed to walk around with big titles or whatever. And I understand, again, the point of them. This is one of the reasons why, I have if somebody will put on a bio or put Sheikh or Maulana, I say, Allah Ta'ala reward them for their good opinion if this is what they think of me. Allah Ta'ala make me fulfill this role for them. But at least I know who I am, and I know who I'm not. And so I don't say anything to those people. Maybe I should stop them from that as well. But mashallah, that was one thing that was very beautiful, both from the Mauritanians and from the mashayikh in Pakistan, is that they were like, this is all stupid. Instead of going out there and trying to front, just do work. If people find some benefit in it, they're gonna come to you. And if there's no benefit in it, it's better for you to go and make an honest living doing something else.
Yeah, mashallah, subhanallah. That's beautiful, man. I mean, honestly, because even I remember Mona Aziz called me one time. He left a voicemail. I didn't pick up, unfortunately. He's like, "Ha, assalamu alaikum, Aziz baat kar raha hu." And I was like, dude, I was just so shocked by that,
Yeah.
Mashallah.
But look at Maulana Aziz, mashallah, no self-promotion, but he's the hibr of the qawm. He's the undiscovered treasure of the entire Chicago. Nobody's ever going to come, for his khatams. Nobody's ever going to, people are not going to throng around and come from all sorts of different places and, huge 10,000 people listening on live stream or whatever. But he is what he is, mashallah. And people who are blind to that reality, they're never going to understand. And a few people Allah showed, they will. But that's one of the beautiful things about the entire world of the heart, is that some people, they're Allah Ta'ala made them like Eid, everybody celebrates them for their greatness. And some people, Allah Ta'ala made them like Laylatul Qadr, that, it's something that nobody knows who it is, where it is, but it has even more barakah in it, And so, I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for at least showing us people like that we can appreciate them. And that's one of the other things. The first time at IAE, I met Maulana Aziz. I was visiting IAE for Dar al-Hikmah or something like that. Dar al-Hikmah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive you. Chicago, you guys are a bunch of haters. You guys, Allah ta'ala forgive you for burying that baby alive. But it was good while it lasted. Darul Hikmah, I remember I came for a Darul Hikmah program. I met Maulana Aziz, and that was one of the first things that we talked about. I told him about studying in Jamia Madaniyan in Mauritania, and so he said that was like me. He said I studied in Banda. It was out in the village. There was like nothing around. I just was very close with my sheikh. He taught me all these things personally, and I think he kind of liked that, from that time until now. I feel like, even though I've taken more than my fair share of like crooked looks and hate from some of the mashayikh, mashallah, it doesn't always go swimmingly. It's not always a home run, but mashallah, with Maulana Aziz, I feel like we connected really well from the beginning. And that's part of it, is because he knows what that life is all about, and that's why he's a very humble person. You won't see him walk around with like super jubbat out with like 20 rings and a huge turban or whatever, but he is who he is. He probably memorized the Hidayah by heart. So like, how are you going to mess with him? And it's funny too. He'll get annoyed sometimes. He'll see some of the other people that, our age group might think of as elders. He goes, yeah, these people are nothing. He says, I taught them, like all of their introductory books. I know who's what and who's who, but you don't see him needing to walk around with pretense. He is what he is. Whoever wants to listen to what he has to say knows that.
No, absolutely, mashallah. After graduating, or after completing the curriculum in Pakistan, you ended up going to Syria and Egypt?
No, I actually went to Syria and Egypt way before all of that.
Okay, so when did you go to Syria and Egypt?
I went to Syria and Egypt in the summer of 2000.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. There was one brother who was really into Arabic. And he didn't really go into the line of studying ilm all that much, but he actually had quite a love of Arabic, and he read some books here and there of the other subjects, but it was more, I guess he just wanted to know enough Arabic to understand the Quran and things like that. And so he went to Syria in the summer of 99, and so he wanted to go in 2000 again. So he's like, you want to go? And I said, sure. So myself and a number of other brothers, not all of whom were super interested in studying, but we all went together that one summer. We took a Turkish Airlines flight and stopped in Istanbul. That was my first journey to Istanbul, like one of, I would say, like at least a dozen or so since then. And it's a city that from that time, although it was very different than it is now, and a very different atmosphere than it is now, but still a very beloved city to me from that time until now. And we're going to be going on this trip, inshallah. I mean, by the time this thing is put out, it's probably going to have been over. We're going to be in the desolate wasteland of the Chicago winter by that time. But this trip that we're taking now is, it's going to be just another excuse to go back. But we went and stayed in Istanbul for, I would say, about a week. Made some really good friends with different people over there, and then went on to Damascus, which is a very stark difference in between Istanbul and Damascus. Again, Syria was and still is a very repressive society, and it was very sad to see the ulama basically, if you say it to them, because the thing is, it's nobody likes it. No, everyone is going to feel insulted if you say this about their country, And I'm not saying it to be insulting, but you see that there are such great mashayikh and such great ulama, and how they have to kind of tippy-toe around the government and everything that they say, and it's a horrible waste. This is one of the things people wonder, why is the Muslim world in shambles? We do it to ourselves. Our people, we do it to ourselves. The populace, it's hard because you look in Syria, one might say the populace is their duty to resist the government if the government is tyrannical. Look what happened in Syria. They resisted, and still it's not helping them at all. But the fact of the matter is that the ummah, if they want to be free and if they want to be, live with honor and dignity, that's not cheap.
Yeah.
And it's easy for us to talk smack over here in America because we're living on someone else's sacrifices. Some of those sacrifices are noble, and some of them are not. Some of them are sacrifices Native Americans, African Americans made in this country to make it what it was, and it was from compulsion. It wasn't voluntary. And so, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for whatever misappropriation that we did, and that we also have the tawfiq of making up for it by standing up for those people and recognizing, that what we benefit from wasn't all of our own doing. These are difficult lessons of life, some of which is difficult to realize until you actually go and travel to another place and see. But the Syria that we saw in that 2000, before any of this happened, it was shortly before I think Hafiz Assad had died, or maybe shortly after. I don't recall right now, but maybe he was still alive at the time. Or he just died. But, the Syria we saw is filled with wonderful people who loved us and treated us really well because they had a tradition of welcoming the students of knowledge from different places in the world. It was a Syria filled with people who were, who loved Deen and who loved Islam and who were very spiritual people. And Syria is always a very Sufi place. And it was always a very spiritual place. And it really breaks my heart to know about how much pain and suffering those people have gone through, and how unnecessarily that entire society was turned inside out. How unnecessarily it was turned inside out. When I say that, I'm not blaming anybody for, blaming anyone. The people who resisted and rebelled against the state, they had their reasons. But when I say unnecessarily, oftentimes we blame everybody but the ones who actually take the main share of the blame, which is the government itself. Just because you have some people protesting outside, it doesn't mean that you release all of your security agencies on people and bury them alive and torture and kill their, children, and just kind of the super horrific things that were done over there, and unfortunately still are being done. But yeah, we spent that time in Syria. Then I went from Syria to Egypt myself, because the other brothers I was with, they're great brothers and things like that, but I wanted to explore a little bit more than they did, and I also, so I thought it was good I'd get away, so I went from there to Jordan, and so that 2000, that was the first time I went to Jordan. I visited Sheikh Nuh as well, and that was interesting. That was kind of my interesting introduction to tasawwuf and what's a sheikh and what's a tariqah, and I had no idea about any of that stuff before that. And from there I went to Egypt. I spent a good summer in Egypt. I was hosted by a beautiful family. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep them happy. I also make dua for them very often, and they let me stay in a vacant apartment that they had while I was there. And I took Arabic lessons over there as well, while wandering, kind of confused in the streets of the Arab world. But that was an interesting kind of introduction to the Arab world. I got a chance to take some Fusha classes while I was in Egypt and learn some tajweed and things like that as well. So it was kind of a preparation for formal studies. You kind of hear people talk about madhab and tariqah and this and that, talk about different names of mashayikh, different names of books that you never really heard of before. But we were way too clueless to understand. There's so many things now. If I could have gone back to Damascus, I should have done this. I should have seen this. I should have met this person. I should have whatever. At that time, completely clueless. We had no idea. It was kind of just our introduction to all those things. We had no idea at that time that was, we had no idea reasonably that we would know that was the last time we would be able to. We'd be able to go to a Syria that was intact, or an Iraq that was intact, or in Egypt that was, not, super even more repressed than it already is. The whole Muslim world's been turned upside down. The whole Arab world has been turned upside down. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy.
Ameen. So after you finished in Pakistan, you ended up back in America?
Yeah, after I finished in Pakistan, I actually wanted to study for longer, and my mother said, no, come home. And I listened to her, and this is not a fiqh opinion, but it's one of the decisions I regret very bitterly. I should have stayed and should have gone and studied more before coming home. Not to say that it's good to make your mother upset, but she would have forgiven me, inshallah. She's a nice person, right?
MashaAllah.
So I should have understood that at the time, but I didn't. And so I came back, and I lived in Seattle for the next about 5 years or so, doing a whole lot of nothing. I would basically just like, if any imam wanted to leave town and go on vacation, he'd say, "Oh, Hamza, can you sub for me?" I say, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah.
And so I subbed a couple of places, like, for a month here, a month there, between like several months of doing nothing. I taught some classes in the MSA or in the MSA's facilities to the people who wanted to take those classes. We tried to run a musalla. Mashallah, there's several people who promised us support for that, and all of them kind of like one by one, after 6 or 7 months, kind of just presented their excuses and faded away. And what ended up happening was that I started going around raising money for the musalla to keep it running, and realized that just the raising money is more. I'm putting more time in raising money than I'm actually putting into teaching. So it's kind of maybe a sign this is a waste of time. So that's when I started entertaining offers from other places.
Yeah.
And Shaykh Amin, Jazahullah Khairan, he gave me the offer to teach at Dar al Qasim for somewhat of a modest salary. And mashallah, my understanding is I was the first full-time first full-time staff after him.
Mashallah.
And I taught there for 3 years, and they were really a wonderful 3 years.
Mashallah.
And because of my growing family and whatnot, I couldn't afford to keep doing that. And I still, in some ways, regret letting go of the position to this day. But you have responsibilities. What can you do? It's qadar Allah wa ma sha'a fa'al. And so then after that, I started doing other fun stuff as well.
Nice, mashallah. What advices would you have for somebody who wants to go study?
Yeah, my advice is that unlike the America that we went from, you have a lot of options here at home. And so I think it's important to go abroad and go live in the Muslim world for some time, but you should maximize your benefit, which is what? You should learn Arabic, you should learn to read the Quran, you should learn how to read books, understand Arabic here. You should learn your basic aqidah, you should learn your basic fiqh, you should learn your basics here, and then go on afterward. What that will do is it will leave you less disoriented because it's already going to a foreign country is a disorienting process.
Yeah.
It will leave you less disoriented when you go to a foreign country. It will leave you less hapless when it comes to communicating with people, because Arabic is the language that unites the ummah. So the more familiar you are with it, the more you'll be able to communicate with other people, understand what they're saying, ask questions that you need to. Otherwise, interestingly enough, Arabs are really bad at teaching Arabic. I mean, they're really bad at teaching Arabic because to them it's like, of course it's Arabic, you should understand it. Whereas they can't sympathize with a person who walks in and may be an intelligent person but just doesn't understand what's going on. Or what kind of phrases or expressions are awkward, or are not readily comprehended by the listener. And so learning Arabic here is probably better. They'll probably do a better job teaching you basic comprehension skills and teaching you basic grammar and things like that. So do that. Study here. Put in some time, and then after that, go abroad. Don't just have all of your learning be here. And I'll put in another caveat that when I say go abroad, that doesn't include South Africa and England. Go to South Africa and go to England in the sense that there's a lot of good teachers there and you can learn. So go there for the learning, but there is a cultural experience that's to be had from living in the Muslim world, from those places that are continually inhabited by Muslims for century after century, where Muslims own the society, where they've been the majority or had the upper hand. They have certain customs, certain understandings, certain things that are more deeply connected with a genuine expression of the deen, of the Quran and of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which is uncomplicated with this extra layer of trying to be in dawah mode, like I have to speak a certain way, otherwise I'm going to get tossed in Guantanamo, or I have to speak a certain way, otherwise I'm going to get canceled, or I have to speak a certain way because if I like whatever, my smile is crooked, maybe that person is never going to accept Islam and it's going to be my fault or whatever. This kind of like cult of dawah mentality that people have that in many ways impedes them from actually living the Islam that they should be aspiring to live, just because they're afraid of other people not understanding or chastising them for it. It's not 100% bogus. Obviously, if you come and walk up to like, whatever your classmates in university and be like, by the way, like for adultery, the punishment in Islam is that you stone a person to death. That's probably not going to be the best intro to the deen, So I understand there is something to be said about the way you present the deen. But people sometimes they go down that rabbit hole so far that they start having such convoluted modes of reasoning. Like, it's time to pray, but I'm not going to pray because what if someone sees me and then it's going to be embarrassing and then they're not going to become Muslim. So it's bad for dawah. Like, it's good to live in a place for some time where a person's heart can decompress from that mode of thinking. And just see the way that people who are committed to actually, traveling the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way they're able to do so without fear and anxiety. And definitely you go to the Muslim world, there's all sorts of like wrong things happening and there's all sorts of people that they're definitely not on that track. But I'm talking about, finding the people who are. And then when you find the people who are, you'll then find that there are certain peculiarities about the people who are even quote unquote cultural Muslims, but those peculiarities make a lot more sense when you look at them in the context of the people who actually are sincere about their deen, and you'll see that those things that you may have dismissed as cultural or as something just weird about foreigners, that they're actually themselves a part of the deen as well. And then you'll also be able to tell which bakwas things are not. So yeah.
Mashallah, mashallah. You started you helped start an organization that I wanted to touch base a little bit about, the Halal Advocates and Hafsa. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, mashallah. Halal Advocates or Hafsa, Halal Food Standards Alliance of America, was an organization that was started in tandem between myself and Mufti Abdullah Nana and a couple of other brothers. There's one local brother here, Adnan Faiz, who is, mashallah, has several relatives in the Chicago area as well. Hafiz Mujtaba, Bhai Abdul Manan, Hassan, Aman, Hafiz Ahmed, etc. His brother Salman Faiz, his twin brother Salman Faiz. If I miss any of your khandan, mashallah, don't get upset. I love all of you guys, so it's all good, alhamdulillah, mashallah. And also a college roommate of mine, Bhai Zuhair Motiwala. What we did was we got together and we put in a lot of work because when I came back from madrasa, you have to understand, like, I didn't grow up in Chicago, so I only started this idea that there's something called halal that involves something more than just like not eating pork. This was like something I only myself came to embrace maybe a year before I went to study. Sometime after, between Syria and between going to Mauritania. Wow. And so when I came back, Mufti Abdullah brought my attention to the fact that, like, hey, a lot of the stuff that's being marketed as halal out there, it's like killed by machine. And, I have no frame of reference for any of these things except for what I've read in the books of fiqh. And I'm like, wow, that can't be halal. And so I was like, okay, well, we lived in Seattle. There's plenty of vegan spots. There's plenty of sushi. There's, alternatives. I was always like, I would go like a week without eating meat, and it wasn't there was no sweat off my back. I didn't really care. But then, upon thinking about it, I thought that's fine. It's a solution for me, but it's not a solution for the ummah. So, we got together and we started to first like maintain lists of which suppliers, supply things that are legitimate so that we ourselves can consume them, and we can also tell other people to consume them. So, I thought this is not a solution for the ummah. It's not a solution for our community. So we got together, we started compiling these kind of like distributor lists. And then we realized this industry is far more complicated than that, because someone's doing something right and then they switch it up all of a sudden in the middle, and everybody has your list that says they're okay. So they're happy because they know they have like, business that they can depend upon, but they just switched it up. And yesterday they were like, haha, brother, mashallah, this is the deen and we're whatever. And then this week they're like, oh, well, I talked to Shaykh so-and-so. And it's like, well, nobody stopped you from that last week, but why is it that you indicated to us that you were going to stay with a certain standard and then surreptitiously switched it up? And they're like, and it's the same thing. They're all sorts of business owners. To this day, they'll do that. They'll they'll promise you one thing, and then the next day when they change it up and you're like, hey, why'd you do that? You kind of told us that you weren't going to. Then they'll, you think you're the only one who knows Islam, and you think Indians are the only Muslims in the world, because they try to make it into a Desi thing. It's not a Desi thing. Go ask the Masājid in the Arab world. The ones that gave fatwa saying that it's permissible to eat here are the ones who, the mustafti, the person asking the question, tells them that, well, everyone here is a Jew or a Christian, and that's not true at all. But at any rate, so we realized that we had to kind of formalize this effort more. And so Mufti Abdullah, because he studied in South Africa, and they did, for their iftar training, they did a module with Sanha, with the South African National Halal Authority, with regards to the fiqh of halal and haram. And mashallah, through the great Gujarati continuum, they were also connected to HMC in the UK. And so we traveled to South Africa, we traveled to the UK, we did trainings with them. Maulana Yunus Dudwala at the HMC, and Maulana Mufti Said Nolaki in Sanha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them. They're all right now real frazzled because the riots that are happening in South Africa. Allah ta'ala protect them. But they gave us a great 1 week with each of them. They gave us a great deal of time. They shared their documentation, their processes with us, their inspections. We went and visited their different chapters in different parts of the country. And then we came back and tried to adopt what we saw, which were really good systems that worked for the countries there, and try to adopt it for the United States, given that we have a much more diffuse population and we have just a lot more stuff coming from a lot more different places to account for. And alhamdulillah, it was a slow start. That was, I think, 2010. And now we have this Chicago and the Bay Area and some other smaller chapters where people can go and eat and consume halal with a fair degree of surety and certainty that somebody's audited the entire system and that they're getting what they're paying for. Sure. And it's not even, because people are like, what are you saying, brother? If I don't have certificate, I'm haram. And it's like, wallahi, brother, I'm Muslim. I say la ilaha illallah. I always have like super tajweed in that I am Muslim claim. And it's like, no, we're not here to say that everybody else is haram. We don't say anything about anybody else. We just say that these are people who came to us, and they wanted to adhere to the standard that is the standard of the sunnah, and we audited it for them. Like, dude, it's like whatever, $25 a month for a restaurant to get like 2 random inspections a week, and like, even then, if a business is struggling, we've let people, go by for like, a year, 2 years without paying, and their businesses fail, and it's a write-off for them and for us. They don't pay anything. Our effort is written off. They didn't pay anything from it. And then like if their business does make money, then we say just pay all of your certification fees. $25 a month is nothing. It's it's like a snotty handkerchief, in terms of the cost of doing business. Mashallah, that we're here to certify that those people who are doing what's right, you should know who they are, because they do incur costs. It is difficult for them to do what they're doing. And they should be recognized for that, and we should give them our business for that, rather than some kind of fly-by-night operation where you don't know what's going on. And at the end of the day, it's just like, brother, I'm Muslim. And it's like, well, I don't know, bro. Like, you're smoking a cigarette in this corner with like a bunch of like Safeway boxes like in your dumpster. Like, it looks pretty shady. No, how dare you? It's like, okay, whatever, man.
Yeah, mashallah. That's interesting.
I have to say, this is basically this is one of those things that I never cared for and I never wanted to do, and it's actually one of the reasons I knew I had to do it.
Mashallah.
Because there's never going to be anyone who's going to celebrate you for it. No one's ever going to give you shabash or high five or whatever for it. Half the people who do, they themselves are like weird people you want to stay away from. The issue is this, though, is it is necessary, and whatever other good deeds, if someone goes and frees Palestine, they're going to have to eat something before they do that, right? So the person who provided them with halal is going to have a share in their reward as well. And but they're going to get all the glory, and shaitan tempts and makes fitna for those people. Whereas for the person, the person who told you your favorite like burger is haram, like they're never going to come take bay'ah with you or whatever. They're going to resent you for the rest of your life. But everybody knows that this was a necessary thing that had to happen. It's kind of like the guy in madrasa that wakes people up for Fajr.
Yeah.
Everyone hates him. If you heard that, everyone hates that person. Even though it's Fajr, it's like one of the 5 pillars, right? It's like Salat. It's like the biggest one after the Shahada, right? But like that person, even if you hear their voice, like at another time of the day, it causes you cringe because it just reminds you of that horrible feeling of like being like stirred from deep sleep.
Yeah.
But you know, who knows? Maybe that guy's going to be the first one to go to Jannah just because of that, you know, because they did something that was so necessary and they got so little recompense for in this world.
Yeah, mashallah. And you serve as a board member for Hafsa. You've served as a board member here at Masjid al-Uthman, mashallah. You've been in
Some time ago, but yes.
some time ago,
Yeah,
mashallah,
yeah.
you were here. And you were an imam in Rockford, an imam in Cleveland,
Yeah.
and currently you're teaching the Tahawiyah with Imam Ghazali Institute. Can you
Amongst other things, I alhamdulillah, mashallah, I have some engagement with the Imam Ghazali Institute. That's through whom we're going to do the trip to Turkey,
mashallah.
and you know, through whom I teach some classes online. I do some writing of articles and things like that as well. And brother Adnan Sattar,
mashallah.
Muhammad Adnan Sattar, who I'm working with, mashallah, he's a good brother. He's the one who, because you mentioned the Tahawiyah, he's the one who actually came to me several years ago and said, like, you know, if there's any project that you want to help out with, you want me to help out with, let me know and we'll pitch it and we'll do that. And I have to say, there are very few helpful people in the world. There are very few helpful people in the world. Many people are just they're consumers, and many people are bratty consumers. But you know, some of them are grateful, but they're at the end of the day, they're just consumers. If you have something for them to consume, they're happy with you, and the day that doesn't work out, they go away. And very few people have vision of how is it that we're going to change the world to make it a better place. It's very difficult for somebody to come and say, okay, like let's work together and like fix this. We need more people like that. I need people like that. The different people who are doing good work in the world, they need people like that. If you don't think I'm one of them, then go find one of them and help them out. Don't just be there to name drop or retweet or like and think your job is done. But yeah, alhamdulillah, he came and he asked, and so I said, yes, I have this idea that we should teach the aqaid of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, Aqidah Tahawiyah, within 15, I can teach it within 15 instruction hours, in a way that the public will get it and understand. You sure? Yeah, I'm sure. But I just need help with logistics and we need to get this out there. And everybody, you know, they're like, well, no one's going to listen, no one's going to sit, no one's going to this, no one's going to that. And, you know, a lot of people just really didn't like the idea. But alhamdulillah, it worked. And since then, it's been about 30 khatams like all over the world. I've gone to all sorts of different places in the world. We read a khatam in Hong Kong and in Turkey and in Trinidad and all sorts of places, even though they have paid people to teach it over there as well. But just because, you know, we made the himma and presented it in a way that people are going to engage with. And so after that, mashallah, there are a number of other projects that we collaborated with over the years, and he offered a lot of support over the years as well. And now we're working together with them. They, mashallah, they hit this one out of the park. He started the book publishing. So Sheikh Aslam and Imam Abdul Aziz Suraqa in Pittsburgh, the two of them put together this really beautiful edition of the Shamal. Allah Ta'ala reward both of them. Ameen. The Shamal Muhammadiyah of Imam Tirmidhi, rahimahullah wa alayhi salatu wassalam. And it was a really good edition, and it was, you know, a service that, you know, that was needed, which the time of which had come. And it happened to coincide right with lockdown when people had nothing else to do. So they put out that edition, and it just, they knocked it out of the park. And since then, dozens of really good books, really good publications they put out. And so, you know, alhamdulillah, mashallah, there's more scope to collaborate. So I'm going to be working with them for the time being, inshallah.
MashaAllah. So this is what you're currently working on. And do you have any projects or future endeavors that are on the horizon?
There are many of them, but what's the point of talking about them before they're done, inshallah?
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. We look forward to that, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan, Mawlana Hamzah. The man who introduced me to sushi. I thank you for that. It's a very expensive habit, mashallah. Jazakallah khairan, Mawlana. Appreciate you coming out. May Allah Ta'ala reward you and bless you and put barakah and afiyah in all the endeavors that you put your mind to, inshallah.
Ameen. Iyana wa yakum. Barakallahu feekum.
Wa feekum barak, inshallah.